May the words of my lips and the meditation of our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I wonder if there was ever a time when the doors of Trinity were left open, unlocked. Does anybody remember those days? A time when anyone could come into the church at any time for prayer or rest or reflection or just a chat. A lot of people have told me about those days when everybody had access. But now, of course, church doors are always locked. Nowadays, nobody has free access because we're so worried that someone's going to steal the candlesticks or drink the communion wine or the grape juice. You can tell I'm an Anglican. Or raid the church fridge, I suppose. But no, our doors are locked. And not just our churches. I can remember when our house doors were never locked. Nobody carried a key when I was a kid, because the door was always open. I don't know what happened at night, but I'm guessing the door was open all night long too. I can remember every now and then there'd be a panic in our household as we scrambled to find the door key because nobody knew where it was when we were going away for the weekend or on holiday. That was probably the only time that our door was ever locked, was when we were out of town. Does anybody leave their doors unlocked now? Probably not. Definitely not. It's an interesting thing to think of our time as the era of locked doors. A locked door can send all kinds of signals. I guess a lot of times our approach to locked doors depends which side of the door we're on. If you're on the outside of a locked door, it can be a problem. Several years ago, my dad fell in his apartment and he couldn't get to his phone. When his friends and neighbors realized that they hadn't seen him lately, they went to his door, but they couldn't get in. The door was locked. Even the caretaker couldn't get in because there was a deadbolt that could only be accessed on the inside. The caretaker had to break the door down before anybody could get in. In this case, a locked door was a problem. But I expect that most of the time, a locked door brings us a sense of safety. When everybody is in for the night and we're all watching a movie in a secluded room or lying in the warmth of our beds, there's a sense of comfort and of security. Nothing can get through. When we're on the inside of a locked door, we're safe. Maybe that's how the disciples felt on that first Easter, that first Easter night, that first week of Easter. They were in a room behind locked doors, afraid that those who killed Jesus might be coming after them too. The world out there was a hostile place. The people had ridiculed them and scorned their leader. They felt as though they had deserted Jesus and their cause. They had failed and felt ashamed. The locked doors kept all of that out. Behind those doors, they felt safe. That's an interesting psychological statement. For we too face fears, anxieties, uncertainties, disappointments. And often we react in the same way. We slam the doors of our hearts, and lock everything up tight. We're not going to let the pain get to us. But even as we do that, even as we batten down the hatches, even as we try to lock the world out, we realize that we are also locking ourselves in. We become sometimes a prisoner of our own shame, our own sins, our own self-perceptions. Nobody can reach us or help us or draw us out. Like the disciples, we try to hide from our disappointments by locking the doors of our hearts and not letting anyone in. And maybe this is especially true if we've been hurt before. Each hurt is followed by another lock until the door becomes an impenetrable barrier. This is the idea expressed so powerfully, I think, in John chapter 20 today. Twice, John presents the disciples as huddled behind closed doors, locked in because of fear. Twice, John has Jesus come through the locked doors and stand in the midst of that frightened and depressed group and breathe peace into them. That image of Christ going through locked doors is perhaps one of the most consoling images within our faith. Put simply, it means that God can help us even when we are too afraid, too hopeless, too broken, even when we cannot help ourselves. God can empower us even when we are too weak and despairing to open the door, even minimally, even just a crack, and let God in. It's a tough idea sometimes for us to grasp, and we often get it wrong. There's a picture that you might know of a man huddled and depressed in fear, in the dark, behind a closed door. Outside the door stands Jesus with a lighted lantern knocking softly on the door. The door has not only on the man's side. Jesus has no doorknob. He can only knock. The purpose is that only you can open that door. And while there may be times when our effort is needed, that's not what our gospel says today. Christ doesn't need the doorknob. Christ can enter closed doors. Christ can enter rooms and hearts that are locked out of fear. God's love is the kind of thing that can descend into hell. God's love isn't left helplessly knocking at the door. God's love doesn't require a despairing person to find the strength to make the first move. There's no hell, there's no private hell of wound or depression or fear or sickness or even bitterness that God's love cannot and will not descend into. And that's what makes this story an Easter story. In the middle of our fears and disappointments, beyond the biggest locks on the strongest doors, Jesus comes and stands among us. Jesus comes looking for us, right through the locked doors to find us. He restores us, as he did the disciples, with the gift of peace and the gift of his Spirit. And with the words of forgiveness, he restores our troubled souls and sets us free. What are the closed places of your life? What keeps you in the tomb? Maybe, like the disciples, it's fear. Maybe it's doubts or disbeliefs, as it was for Thomas. Perhaps it's sorrow and loss. Maybe the wounds are so deep it seems almost impossible even to admit them or face them or voice them. We simply don't want to go there. For others, it may be anger and resentment. Some seem unable or unwilling to open up to new ideas or possibilities and change. But the gospel is clear. Jesus is always entering the locked places of our lives. Unexpected, uninvited, sometimes even unwanted. Jesus steps into our closed lives, our closed hearts, our closed minds. Standing among us, he offers us peace and breathes new life into us. And then it is always Easter. He won't open the door for us, but comes through that door nonetheless. And he gives us all we need so that we might open our doors to a new life, a new creation, a new way of being, to resurrection. At the edge of your dear one's grave, you shed silent tears as the wind sweeps by. The loss is deep, deeper than you expected. Sorrow has closed the door of your heart. But Jesus stands in the center of that pain and says, "Peace be with you." All your life, you've used the bottle to take away the pain, to forget that terrible moment, to ignore that terrible feeling. It feels like a huge elephant you can't acknowledge. Fear has closed the door of your heart. But Jesus stands in the center of that pain and says, "Peace be with you." In your mind, you hear over and over again the voice of your father, perhaps, your mother, perhaps, telling you that you will never amount to anything. Those words and that memory have robbed you of your dignity, of your true worth. Self-doubt has closed the door of your heart. But Jesus stands in the center of that pain and says, "Peace be with you." Whatever the circumstances, Jesus shows up bringing peace, offering peace, embodying peace. Whatever you face, Jesus slips through your locked door, bringing life, offering life, embodying life. You are free. Life and peace and freedom are resurrection realities. Of course, they might not necessarily change the circumstances of our world. Disasters will still happen. Life can still be hard. Loved ones will still die. But the life and peace of Jesus' resurrection enable us to meet those circumstances and to live through them. He gives us his peace, his breath, his life. We are free to unlock the doors of our lives and step outside into God's life, the resurrected life that comes to us all. Thanks be to God. Amen.